Every tyrant believes they are righteous. Every empire calls its conquest justice. The words echo like a confession carved into the walls of history. Because beneath every war, every revolution, every law written in the name of virtue, there hides something far darker. A mask, a performance of morality, worn so convincingly that even the actors begin to believe their own lines. We've built our civilizations on this illusion, that good and evil are clear, that right and wrong are simple. But what if they were never opposites at all? What if morality itself has always been the most elegant disguise for power? Think of it. Every act of censorship claims to protect the innocent. Every invasion claims to defend freedom. Every lie told by leaders is justified as for the greater good, and every generation, without fail, learns to worship the same illusion, that righteousness cannot harm, that virtue cannot kill. Yet history whispers something different. The Inquisition burned in the name of purity. Empires slaughtered in the name of civilization. Modern nations silence dissent in the name of peace. And the crowd applauds, convinced that moral violence isn't violence at all. Because the truth is unsettling. Morality has never been neutral. It bends, it shifts, it serves. And more often than not, it serves power. This is the paradox we're not meant to see. That the line between justice and tyranny isn't drawn by virtue, but by victory. The winners become the righteous. The defeated become the wicked. And history, written by those who prevail, baptizes cruelty as necessary. It was Niccolò Machiavelli who first dared to tear away the mask. He didn't praise evil, as many accused him of doing. He simply refused to pretend. He saw that behind every saintly promise lies a political calculation. That goodness, in the hands of the powerful, is not a principle, but a strategy. So tonight, we step into his forbidden world, where morality is not what it seems, where truth and deception share the same face, and where the greatest weapon in history was never the sword, but the idea of being good. In the beginning, morality was not a revelation. It was a design, not written by gods, but by men who needed to keep other men in line. Long before kingdoms and cathedrals, there were tribes, fragile clusters of survival, bound by fear and hunger. To hold them together, the elders began to speak of rules, of right and wrong, of what the spirits demanded. But these weren't sacred truths. They were social inventions, weapons of order wrapped in myth. The first moral codes were not born to make people good. They were born to make people obedient. They taught that disobedience angered the gods, that questioning the chief invited ruin. And in that fear, humanity's oldest fear, control was born. As societies grew, so did the sophistication of this invisible chain. Morality became institutionalized. Kings no longer ruled by force alone. They ruled by sanctity. They claimed their crowns gleamed with divine approval. To doubt the king became to doubt God. To rebel was not just treason, it was blasphemy. And so, morality became the most efficient form of domination ever created. No sword could cut as deep as guilt. No army could conquer as completely as faith. When the people believed that obedience was righteous, no chains were needed. They bound themselves. The priests, the monarchs, the lawmakers, all learned the same art. To rule not by fear, but by conscience. To cloak power in piety, cruelty in holiness, and control in compassion. By the time of the Renaissance, this art had reached perfection. Europe was draped in the moral theater of the church. A world where every whisper of desire was called sin. Where poverty was virtue, and doubt was heresy. while on the streets of Florence, Venice, and Rome, behind cathedrals glowing with gold leaf and incense, the real battles for power were fought not in heaven, but in backrooms, betrayals, and blood. This was the world Niccolo Machiavelli inherited, a world where morality spoke in hymns, but ruled through manipulation. He saw princes who prayed by day and plotted murders by night. He saw popes preaching humility while amassing armies. He saw divine justice used to justify every act of deceit and domination. And from this chaos, Machiavelli drew a heretical conclusion: that morality, as preached by rulers, was never about goodness at all. It was language, carefully crafted to maintain power. Every sermon, every decree, every moral law was rhetoric, a story told by the powerful to keep the powerless in place. The church called it virtue. The crown called it loyalty. But Machiavelli called it what it truly was: strategy. Because once you control what people believe is right, you no longer need to force them to do what's useful. They'll do it themselves, convinced they are serving heaven, while unknowingly serving the hand that holds their leash. Machiavelli's words were never meant for the righteous. They were meant for those who had seen too much, for those who had watched good men destroyed by their own ideals. When he wrote The Prince, it wasn't a hymn to cruelty. It was a manual for survival, a revelation whispered from the heart of chaos. Those who rule by virtue alone will fall to those who rule with awareness. In an age when every ruler swore allegiance to God, Machiavelli dared to speak to reality instead. He stripped politics of its sacred disguise and laid bare its anatomy: power, fear, deception, loyalty, betrayal, the true organs that kept the state alive. He looked upon the moral stage of his time and saw not holiness, but performance. Machiavelli's hidden law was simple, brutal, and unforgiving. Morality is a mask, a necessary illusion. A ruler must wear it to be loved, but know when to remove it to survive. To him, virtue wasn't the path to power. It was the costume that concealed it. Because a prince who is good in a world that is not will not remain a prince for long. Machiavelli understood that politics was never a contest between good and evil, but between perception and consequence. He saw that humanity's deepest hunger wasn't for truth. It was for the appearance of virtue. And those who could feed that illusion ruled those who could not. The church, the nobles, the moral philosophers, they trembled. Because in Machiavelli's mirror, their divine order was exposed as theater. Their sermons on purity became tools of persuasion. Their morality, once thought sacred, was revealed as an instrument of control. He showed that the world does not reward goodness, but cunning. That honesty without strategy is suicide. That to protect a nation, a ruler might need to deceive it. And that the preservation of peace sometimes demanded the performance of righteousness, more than its practice. To the moral idealists, this was blasphemy. To Machiavelli, it was simply how things were. He wrote that it is better to be feared than loved, not because fear is noble, but because love is fickle. He warned that men are easily deceived by appearances, that they judge not by truth, but by what they wish to believe. And so, the wise ruler must master appearances, seeming merciful, seeming faithful, seeming just, while keeping his true motives known only to himself. Machiavelli never invented deception. He merely acknowledged its throne. He watched as nations rose not on piety, but on strategy. He saw that the difference between a tyrant and a hero was often nothing more than the story told afterward. Morality, he realized, was not the substance of power, it was its decoration. His revelation was not that humans are wicked, but that humans need the illusion of goodness to function. They crave moral order, even when it's false. They will forgive corruption if it wears a righteous smile. And so, the shrewd leader learns to speak in the language of virtue, while moving in the logic of necessity. This was Machiavelli's hidden law, that morality itself is a political instrument, not a moral one, that appearances sustain stability, and sincerity can destroy it, that truth, in the hands of the powerful, is less useful than faith, and the ruler who understands this balance commands not just armies, but belief itself. To read the Prince is to confront a truth most cannot bear, that the world runs not on goodness, but on the illusion of it, and those who see through that illusion stand alone, haunted by the knowledge that morality, the brightest mask of mankind, has always been hollow, and yet somehow necessary. Why do we obey? Why do human beings surrender their will? Not to cruelty, but to righteousness that destroys them? The answer lies not only in history, but in our minds. We like to believe that morality is the voice of reason, a compass pointing toward the good. But often, it's something far simpler and far more dangerous. A reflex, a deeply conditioned instinct to obey, especially when the command comes wrapped in virtue. From childhood, we're taught that goodness means compliance, that morality means following the rules, that questioning authority means rebellion, and rebellion means evil. By the time we grow up, obedience doesn't feel like submission anymore. It feels like being good. Psychologists would later prove what Machiavelli already understood, that most people will not choose what is right. They will choose what is approved. In the 1960s, Stanley Milgram set up a quiet laboratory at Yale University. Volunteers were told they were helping with a study on learning. They were instructed to deliver electric shocks to another person whenever they answered incorrectly. With every mistake, the voltage increased. Screams filled the room. And still, they continued. Some hesitated, some trembled. But when the man in the white coat said, "The experiment requires that you continue," they obeyed. 65% of participants went all the way, believing they were killing someone, yet convinced they were doing what was right. Milgram's conclusion was haunting. Ordinary people, simply following moral authority, could become agents of destruction. A decade later, the Stanford prison experiment revealed the same truth. In an even darker mirror, college students, divided into guards and prisoners, slipped into their roles so completely that cruelty became natural, justified, almost righteous. The guards weren't monsters. They were ordinary young men, obeying an unspoken script. Once again, morality had turned into theater, obedience wearing the mask of justice. This is how control works. It doesn't need chains or threats. It only needs the illusion of virtue. When authority claims moral ground, resistance feels immoral. When punishment is called justice, cruelty feels sacred. And when obedience is equated with goodness, tyranny doesn't even look like tyranny anymore. We call this moral conditioning. A lifetime of being praised for compliance, punished for questioning, and rewarded for conformity. It begins at home, deepens in school, and solidifies in religion, law, and culture. The result is a moral reflex, one that flinches not at injustice, but at defiance. It's why soldiers can follow immoral orders, why citizens can justify censorship, why people can watch suffering and feel righteous about it. Because in their minds, they are not doing harm. They are doing what they were told is good. This is the psychology of control. the mechanism Machiavelli recognized long before modern science gave it a name. He knew that ruling through morality was more powerful than ruling through fear. Because when people believe they're serving the good, they'll enforce their own chains. But there is another kind of morality, a quieter one. Not the kind shouted from pulpits or printed in laws, but the one born of awareness and empathy. True morality doesn't demand obedience. It demands understanding. It asks not, "What is permitted?" but, "What is compassionate?" It sees through the illusion of righteousness and listens instead to conscience. Weaponized morality divides. True morality awakens. And that, perhaps, is why the illusion remains so powerful. Because once you see that goodness can be used to justify anything, obedience no longer feels pure, and a system built on blind virtue begins to tremble. We obey not because we are good, but because we are afraid of not being good. Fear disguised as morality. That is how the world is controlled. The battlefield has changed, but the weapon remains the same. Once, morality ruled through kings and cathedrals. Now, it rules through screens. Today, righteousness trends by the hour. Moral outrage is broadcast, multiplied, and monetized. Every tweet, every headline, every cause becomes another stage for virtue. Another battle in the endless war for moral dominance. We live in an age where perception is power, and nothing shapes perception more effectively than the illusion of goodness. Governments no longer need divine authority to justify their wars. They only need the right slogan: peacekeeping, democracy, freedom. Words that sound holy enough to cleanse the blood beneath them. Corporations wrap themselves in moral branding, selling compassion while paying starvation wages, preaching sustainability while draining the earth. But the packaging gleams with conscience, and so the consumer feels righteous buying what's corrupt. Even individuals have learned to weaponize morality. A post, a hashtag, a statement, each one a badge of virtue. A declaration that says, "I am one of the good ones." But beneath this theater of empathy often lies something colder. The hunger for dominance, disguised as decency. This is the new power. To destroy reputations not with evidence, but with moral accusation. To silence dissent not with argument, but with shame. We no longer burn heretics. We cancel them. We no longer crown kings by divine right. We anoint influencers by moral alignment. And in this digital empire, outrage is the new currency. Whoever feels most offended wields the greatest control. It feels righteous, doesn't it? To condemn, to expose, to purify. Yet every crusade, ancient or modern, begins the same way. With the belief that we are the good ones, that our cause is just, that our anger is holy, and that whoever disagrees must be the enemy. But beneath the noise of this moral warfare, something sacred is lost. Conversation, curiosity, the humility to admit that even our own side may be wrong. Machiavelli would have recognized this world instantly. He would have seen how every ideology claims virtue, how every movement cloaks its hunger for power in moral light. He would have understood that morality remains the most effective form of control, because when people believe they are defending truth, they will justify anything. We call it progress, but often it is only evolution. The same ancient manipulation, reborn in modern form. Where propaganda once wore robes and crowns, it now wears hashtags and headlines. And yet, not all of it is malicious. There is still real compassion in the world. People who stand for justice not because it's fashionable, but because it's right. But their voices drown in the noise of performance. Their empathy becomes another product. Their sincerity, another trend. The battlefield of morality today is not fought between good and evil, but between authenticity and appearance, between truth and spectacle, between the quiet voice of conscience and the thunder of public approval. Machiavelli's hidden law still reigns. Those who understand perception will rule those who worship purity. And the most dangerous weapon in our modern world is not deceit. It is moral certainty. Because once a person believes they cannot be wrong, they can justify anything. And in that moment, morality becomes the perfect disguise for power. We like to believe the corruption of morality exists out there, in governments, in corporations, in systems of control. But the truth is far closer. It lives within us. Every human being, no matter how kind or awakened, carries the same temptation to turn their own sense of righteousness into a weapon. We do it quietly, instinctively, in our relationships, when we use moral language to win an argument, not to seek truth, but to prove we're the better one. In our workplaces, when we hide ambition behind principle, convincing ourselves that others are selfish, while our motives are pure. In our identities, when we define ourselves by what we oppose, believing our moral clarity makes us different, safer, cleaner. We tell ourselves stories about goodness, and in doing so, we blind ourselves to the ways we harm others. We gossip under the excuse of honesty. We punish under the banner of justice. We withdraw love and call it boundaries. And somewhere inside, a quiet voice whispers that we are still good, because our reasons feel noble. But this is the same illusion Machiavelli warned against. Not political this time, but deeply personal. The belief that righteousness makes us immune to corruption. That because we see ourselves as moral, we cannot be cruel. That our intentions wash our hands clean. Yet every war, every betrayal, every cruelty ever committed began with someone who believed they were doing what was right. The tyrant, the zealot, the lover, the ordinary person defending their pride, all convinced by the same comforting lie, that virtue belongs to them. The illusion of righteousness is the most intimate form of power. It lets us dominate while feeling innocent. It lets us wound while believing we are healing. It lets us hate and call it love for truth. Look closely, and you'll see it in yourself. In every moment you felt morally superior. Every time you condemned someone's flaws, without examining your own. The human mind protects its image of goodness like a shrine. Because to admit the shadow within would mean shattering the story that keeps us safe. But awareness begins in that fracture. When we dare to see that our light casts a shadow, that our sense of goodness is not purity, it's perception, and perception can be deceived. True morality doesn't live in certainty. It lives in humility, in the willingness to doubt one's own righteousness. It's born not from pride, but from awareness, from knowing that inside every good person lies the potential for harm. And inside every bad person lies the capacity to change. Machiavelli's warning was never just for rulers. It was for us. Because the moment we see ourselves as the good ones, we stop questioning our own power. And when morality blinds us to our own darkness, we become everything we claim to despise. In the end, after all the illusions have burned away, something quieter begins to emerge. An awakening. When you finally stop asking what is right and begin asking who decided it was, you step beyond the world of borrowed truths. You begin to see morality not as law, but as language. A language written by those who needed order, refined by those who needed control, and now spoken by billions who never question the script. But those who awaken, they learn a different tongue. They no longer chase approval disguised as virtue. They no longer bow to systems that weaponize guilt. They begin to create values not out of fear, but out of understanding. Nietzsche called them the noble souls, the ones who stand beyond good and evil, not because they reject morality, but because they have outgrown the illusion of it. They know that morality can both protect and imprison, that it can serve love or disguise domination. They see that awareness, not obedience, is the highest form of virtue. Because once you see how the game is played, how goodness can be manufactured, how righteousness can be sold, you can finally choose to act not from programming, but from consciousness. True freedom begins there. When you stop letting others define your virtue. When you understand that goodness without awareness is blindness, and awareness without goodness is emptiness. To walk the line between them, that is wisdom. Morality can be armor, but it can also be a cage. And the key has always been understanding. As the light fades, ask yourself, if morality can be used to control, what then is true freedom? If this journey made you think, if it made you question what you've always believed about power, virtue, and truth, then stay with us. Your reflection, your curiosity, your willingness to question, that's what keeps Lunithought alive. So take a moment. Like this video if it resonated with you. Share it with someone who still believes morality is simple. And subscribe if you're ready to keep exploring the ideas most people are too afraid to touch. Because this isn't just philosophy, it's awakening. And it begins with a single thought, a thought that dares to step beyond good and evil.